Alright, so let's get started. Hello everyone, welcome to our YouTube channel, that is UPSC Gig by NRG. Today we are going to unravel lecture number 9 of first chapter, that is Ethics and Human Interface. In the previous 8 lecture we have seen various dimensions of ethics like value and ethics, law of ethics, what are the various branches and scope of ethics. We have seen ethics in its particularity, right? So we have very much unraveled various concepts of first chapter, and in this chapter number 9 or lecture number 9 we are basically to deal with the consequence of ethics in human action. Okay, what are the consequences of ethical human action, right? But before moving further, I would love to have you all answer this particular question, which was question for the day of yesterday. Okay, so the question was, consider the following factors in making ethical judgments, right? So the first was motive, the motive from which the action springs. The second was nature of the act itself, and third, the resulting consequences, right? So as in the concept of determinants, we have already dealt with the 5 determinants of ethics, which was first the source, basically the internal source and external source like law, conscience, and etc. The second was motive and intentions, right? The third one was basically the matter of an action, which basically consisted of the means and ends, matter of actions, right? The fourth was basically the consequences or result of an action will decide whether the particular action was right or wrong. And the fifth was the circumstances, right? The circumstances or situation in which the particular act was committed. On the basis of these 5 determinants, any action shall be decided whether it was right or wrong on these 5 grounds. So as in the questions, we can explicitly see the first option given here is motive, which we can see here as a determinant, right? So the first option is absolutely correct. The second is nature of the act itself, which will basically consist of the matter of act, like what is the means what's acquired in order to reach to a particular end. So this option is also absolutely right. And third is the resulting consequences, right? On the basis of result, we decide the rightness or wrongness of an action. So this option also becomes absolutely right. So here the right answer is the right answer is basically 1, 2, and 3, right, for us. Now let's move further. So just to take you through the what we have done yesterday, so we have basically continued doing the determinants of ethics, right, where we have seen the third determinant, which basically comprised of matter of an action, that was means and end. Then we have basically seen a particular, when we talk about means and ends, there was 2 school. The first school which propounded the idea that end justifies the means, and we have seen the main propounder like Marx and Niccolo Machiavelli. The second school was basically the purity of means by Gandhi G and basically the Immanuel Kant, right? Then we have seen the 4 important, the fourth one, which was basically the intention, and the fifth one circumstances, right? Then we have circumstances, and with this we have end yesterday's lecture. If you guys haven't watched the previous lecture, I highly recommend you to go and watch the previous lecture, because it will help you build the conceptual clarity in very solidific manner. Okay, so let's start today's lecture with this particular concept, that consequence of ethics in human action. Alright, so let's start today's lecture, that is the consequence of ethics in human action. Alright, so before starting the lecture, we have to understand what does this particular term when we say consequence mean. Okay, so the consequence is basically an effect or result of an ethical action, right, of an ethical action, right? As we know that a doer or individual basically engages oneself in two type of action. Either the action can be right action, or the action can be wrong action, right? If the action committed by the doer is right, it will ultimately have the right consequence, and if he commits wrong action, then there are higher chances as well that it will have wrong consequence, or result, right? But here as well there is an exception. Exception like what? Even sometimes right action can lead to the bad consequence or result, right? We have seen the case of medical officer in the previous lecture, where he engages in the right action, but there is a wrong consequence or result, which was basically the demise of the patients. And sometimes even the wrong action can lead to a good result, like a bureaucrat engages himself in the corruption to donate the money for welfare of the people. The action was basically wrong, but the outcome was correct, right? So these are the exceptions that we consider while we talk about the consequence of ethics in human action. But universally, when we talk about the right action and wrong action, the basically right means will always lead to the right end, right? And the wrong means will always lead to the wrong end. We know the concept of what? The purity of means by Gandhi G. Who propounded the idea that one cannot expect the plant of rose by planting the seed of babul, right? You guys can take the note of such statement and quotation. It will for sure help you all add the value in your answer. You can start your answers by quoting such statements by prominent figures like Gandhi Ji and etc., right? Who says that one cannot expect plant of rose by planting the seed of babul. One cannot expect good result by planting the bad means, right? By adopting a bad means, one cannot accept a good result. So this is what is the universal accepted idea of when we talk about the what consequence of ethics, right? So this is basically the universal held idea that the consequence of ethics will be good if the means or action is what? If the means or action is good, and the consequence or outcome, the result and basically the action, okay? Or it can be vice versa as well, okay? So the good action will always lead to good result, and the bad action will always lead to what? Bad result. This is the universally held idea. And on the basis of this, the mechanism of what? Rewards. On the basis of this, the mechanism of rewards and punishment is developed, right? How? Because we always have to remember the two factors. Which leads human beings to act ethically. हमें हमेशा दो चीज़ों को ध्यान में रखना है जिसके कारण से हम सारे लोग एथिकली बिहेव करते हैं. वो दो फैक्टर क्या है? वो दो मोरल रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी क्या है? द फर्स्ट इज व्हाट? द फर्स्ट इज बेसिकली रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी. Right? And the second is it is accountability. What is responsibility? Responsibility is basically moral obligation or expectation. And what is accountability? It is basically legal expectation. What does this mean, right? So responsibility is basically by the society. By the society, you have to be responsible to the society. Why? Because as Aristotle propounded the idea that humans by nature are social animals, social slash political animals. We ought not to live without the society, right? And hence we have this social responsibility towards the society. We have this moral obligation towards the society, and if we have to live, or if we want to live in the society, we have to act as per the society, right? So this is the first factor which makes us to act ethically, right? Because we are staying in the society, we have to act in certain manner which is accepted by the society, right? In our normal Indian household, हम usually अपने बड़ों को कहते हुए सुनते हैं कि चार लोग देखेंगे तो क्या बोलेंगे, राइट? सो दिस इंटेंजिबल चार लोग थ्योरी, रिमेंबर दिस चार लोग, this is not something a part of our theory, but just to remember चार लोग, right? Usually we hear the term that चार लोग देखेंगे तो क्या बोलेंगे, right? So this चार लोग is what? चार लोग is here basically the moral or societal expectations, right? That if we are staying in the society, we have to be concerned about this चार लोग. चार लोग is basically a representation or symbolism of society, right? Society at large, because we are living in society and we have certain moral obligations towards the society. So this is the first factor which influences or persuade human beings to act in ethical manner. And what is the second factor? It is basically the accountability. What is accountability? Okay, so what is accountability? Accountability is basically the legal expectations, right? So we have already seen the moral societal expectations. Being a part of society, we have to act in the certain way which is accepted by the society, but we are also the political animal. We are also staying in a state, right? We are also staying in a legally binded state, and hence there is some legal expectations as well, right? That we have to act in certain manner as per the law. We have to act in certain manner as per the law. हम एक लीगली मेड कॉन्स्टिट्यूटेड स्टेट में हैं, भारत एज अ नेशन और स्टेट, राइट? सो हम यहाँ पे यहाँ के लॉ के हिसाब से वी हैव टू एक्ट. There is certain recommendation by the constitution to the people of our nation that such and such things needs to be followed. Nobody ought to be discriminated, right? Discrimination is strictly prohibited. So if someone practices discrimination, it will be the against the law. It will be what? Against the law. Example, right? So thus we are basically talking about the second factor, that is accountability, right? Accountability. What is accountability? It is basically the legal obligation, right? So why legal obligation? Because we are staying in a legalized state, right, which has made certain law for the citizens to be followed, right? Because if there will be no law, if there will be no regulation, if there will be no rule, people will act as per their nature. Right? What does this mean, that people will act as per the nature? Because people are, or the human beings are considered as what? Human beings are basically considered as what? A passionate a passionate, or individuals driven by their passion, their desires and their lust to obtain the limited resources, right? So this is what the social contractualist school of philosophers like Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau will propound, right? We will do them in greater detail when we do the chapter of moral thinkers, right? But for now just have the idea. According to the social contractualist school, they propound the nature of man as a men are basically driven by the passion, right, their desires and the lust to obtain the limited resources, right? So as we all know that the wants of human beings are basically what? They are basically infinite, they are basically what? Unlimited. But the resources on the other sides are what? The resources are very much limited in nature, right? And if there will be no law, what will happen? Because in order to gain or obtain this natural limited, people will start fighting with each other, people will start engaging in what? Power tussle, right? They will start terminating each other in order to gain this limited resources, right? Why? Because at the end, the most powerful individual will prevail, and in order to prove that they are the most powerful individual, they will basically what? Engage in the fight, right? And this will all lead to what? This will all lead to a state of nature. This will all lead to what? State of nature. In order to hinder the state to slip into this state of nature, there is a provision of law. There is a provision of what? A mutual agreed law that people themselves has created in order to get obliged to this particular law or constitution, that yes, we are willing to get abided by this law. Because why? Because it provides a safety and security to human beings, right? Safety and security to human beings. That's why people become what? People become accountable and they act in a certain manner, because it provides what? Safety and security of life and property to men, right? Why life and property? Because life is the supreme absolute right, supreme and absolute right, and property is something without which the life is not worth living. Life is not worth living, right? That's why the law which provides the safety and security of life and property, every individual ought to follow the law, and hence they become accountable, that is legally obliged to the state, right? So these are the two factors which lead human beings to act in a certain manner. What is that certain manner? It is basically ethically. The two factors, that is, first was responsibility and second was accountability. These are the two factors which nudge or lead human being to act ethically in the state / society, right? So I am hoping that you guys are getting and understanding the concept. If you guys have any doubt, then leave it in the comment section. I will take that and deal that in the next lecture. Okay, so let's see some of the consequences of ethics in human actions, right? So what will be the effect of or the result that we will have if we will act ethically? Okay, so there will be two consequences, right, or the consequences in two spheres, right? So the first sphere will be the private sphere, and the second will be the public sphere, right? So what does this particular term private sphere and public sphere mean? So private sphere is basically the individual limited sphere, right, where the action of individual will not basically bother the other than himself or the other than the individual. So this is basically the individual own sphere or individual own self. The consequence will mainly deal with the individual own self. But in public sphere, what it will lead to? It will lead to the influence or effect in the society at large. Influence and effect in the society at large. अगर हम कुछ ऐसा चीज करेंगे उसकी कॉन्सिक्वेंसेज दो जगहों पर होंगी, राइट. एक तो प्राइवेट स्पेयर में होगा, हमारे खुद के लाइफ में होगा, एंड एक पब्लिक स्पेयर में होगा, राइट. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, लेट्स से देयर इज अ ब्यूरोक्रेट, देयर इज एन आईएएस who is engaging in corruption, right. So what will be the two influence? The first influence will be in his private life, right. He will basically offend his own conscience, that is, he will offend his moral obligations, responsibility, right. And the second consequence will be in public sphere, right, because he is holding a public office of an administrator. So he will send a wrong message, in the society, right. Wrong message in the society. And what will be the result? So result will be like there will be debasement of credibility. If we will come to know that this IS officer is corrupt, we will not trust that individual, and hence his credibility will be siphoned off, and he will lack the trust. People will not easily trust that particular administrator, right. We will say he is ghuskhor or he is corrupt officer. People will not be happy, right. People will not feel obliged towards that particular officer, right. So these are the consequences that we can see. So let's see some of the detailed values in the private sphere. What are the consequences or the ethical consequences that you can keep in handy in order to attempt the answer whenever it is asked related to the private sphere? So what is the consequence of ethical actions, right? What is the consequence of ethical action in the private sphere? So the consequences can be credibility, right? If anyone performs ethical action in the private sphere, the consequence will be credibility. He will have again a huge credibility in the society, right? We usually know some person in our social group who is very ethical, right? And hence we always confide in him. We know that the person acts whatever we will tell him, he will always keep our secrets. He will not reveal that secrets to anyone else, and hence we trust this person. We build trust upon that person, right? We have that trust upon the person. He have the social capital. What does this term social capital means? It is basically the sharing of same values with others, which results into mutual works and coexistence, right? Just in simpler term, what does this mean? It basically means that it will help enhance your social capital. What is the social capital? It is basically the sharing of same values which is socially accepted in the society, which will lead to the idea of mutual coexistence and coexistence in harmony, so that we can work in the same atmosphere and prosper at the same time, right? People will easily tend to trust you. They will have the credibility. You will be happier in the society. Why you will be happier? Because you know that you are doing no wrong, right? You are doing nothing wrong in the society, and hence you will be happier in the other, right? As per the most famous adage, we know that somebody who commits wrong, they will always be in misery. Why? Because they will always have a sense of guilt in themselves, right? And if someone is doing ethical act, what will be the consequence? It will be the happiness, right? And as per the Aristotle, we know Nicomachean ethics, we know the concept of eudaimonia. What does this particular term means? Is it basically means the utmost goal or aim of human existence is happiness, right? So this particular most important value of human life will be satisfied, right? And hence people will become more happier and prospering. This is why it becomes very important and pertinent for human beings to act ethically in the society, right? And what are the some others consequence? It will elevate the sense of being, the sense of human beings, the sense of being, right? It will satiate your conscience, right? It will satiate one's conscience. What is conscience? It is basically antaratma, our own faculty of ethics, that is our internal source of ethical judgment, right? So whenever we do something wrong, it is our antaratma or conscience which tells us whether we are doing something right or wrong. That's why it becomes very important to satiate one's conscience by doing the right action, because if you commit the wrong action, you will never be able to sleep peacefully at the night, right? That is why it becomes very important to satiate our human conscience, and hence the result of ethical action is that it satiates one's conscience, right? So it helps in the decision making. It helps in the decision making. Why or how it helps in the decision making? Because if one is engaging in ethical act, right, he know his decision can never be negative, or his decision can never be led into any negative or ill consequence, because he is always abiding by the ethics and norms that is by the society, right? So these are some of the consequence of ethics in private sphere, right? So whenever writing about ethics in private sphere, always remember to quote Gandhi Ji, who said that happiness is when what one thinks, what one say, and what one does are in harmony, right? And if you act ethically, if you satiate your conscience, this harmony will be met. How? Because it will lead you to think in very objective manner, in very good manner. It will help you to say ethical, and it will ultimately lead you to act or do ethical, right? So this will basically harmonize your overall well-being, and you can live a happy life, more satisfied life as per Gandhi Ji, and this is how you do justice to the answer, by giving a moral credibility of prolific and great personalities like Gandhi Ji, Abraham Lincoln, and etc. in your answers, right? So this was the consequence of ethics in human action in private sphere. Now let's see some of the consequences of ethics in human action in private sphere or the public sphere, right? Public sphere. The second is basically the public sphere. So public sphere is majorly consists of political sphere. Second is first is political sphere, the second is social sphere, and third is religious sphere. Right? Now let's see each of them in greater depth and clarity. The first thing we will see is the public sphere. What will be the consequence of ethics in human action in public sphere, right? So it will basically, what will be the let's divide So what will be the consequence of good action? Consequence of good action in public sphere, or the ethical action, and we will see the consequence of bad action, right? We have to know, right? Because we are aspiring for one of the most covenanted post of our country, that is Indian Administrative Service, right? And we have to be very mindful, about our action, right? Because we have to know what action will present or manifest as a what consequence in the public sphere, because you are not only concerned about your private sphere, you have to concerned about the public sphere, because you are representing a particular institution and not only yourself. आप एक पूरे जिले के अधिकारी होंगे, आप एक पूरे जिले के एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर होंगे, and hence you will be representing a institution in itself, that is an administrator, that is often bureaucrat, right? This is not that is not you who shall be represented, but this is an institution that is of bureaucracy, which will be represented through your personality, right? That shall be represented through your personality, and hence it becomes very important for us to be mindful of the consequences of good actions in public spheres and consequences of bad action in public spheres as well. So what are the some of the most important consequences that you guys can keep in handy while attempting any answer? The first consequence in public sphere, right? So let's when we talk about public sphere, we have to keep in mind the constitutional values, right? Constitutional values. Why? Because we all are abiding by the holy law book of our country, that is the constitution. So what are the some of the important constitutional values? It will basically strengthen the democracy, right? It is basically strengthen the democracy, and it will strengthen which democracy? It will strengthen the largest democracy of the world. It will strengthen the largest democracy of the world. We are not only any democracy, we are the largest democracy, and here we have to be very mindful, because being a largest democracy, we are not only confined to our own country, but we are confined to the entire world. And this is how the grassroots democracy, like the district level administration, it becomes very important for them to be mindful about the action they are committing in their district level, and this is how their good action will lead to the strengthening of what? One of the largest democracy of the world, right? It will lead to what? It will lead to the welfare of the state, because when you execute, when being a civil servant, when you execute certain policy of center and state, what it will lead to? It will lead to the welfare of the people, right? This is why administrator is known as civil servant. Why? Because we are serving the civilians of the country for their welfare, and this is how the good action will lead to the welfare of the state, and it will be a productive essence of ethics in the society, right? Because it is meeting the ultimate aim or goal of our duty, that is to promote service to the civilians by the welfare and justice, right? So this is the second consequence. What will be the third consequence? It will be basically promotion of constitutional virtues, constitutional virtues, like what? Like equality, like liberty, like fraternity, like justice, secularity, etc. right? So these are the important virtues which shall be safeguarded and promoted in the society if an administrator will engage in the good action, right? Because there will be a sense of justice in the people who are being administered through that particular individual and his good ethical action, right? So these are that was the third important consequence. What can be the fourth? You guys can also consider your own consequences, right? You can use your own reason and come out with some of the important consequence. Just imagine yourself as an administrator, and if you engage in any good action, what it will lead to, and mention that in the comment. I will ensure to add that in the next lecture as well, right? So also it will strengthen the constitutional values. It will strengthen the constitutional values, right? Because we are the individual who are responsible to safeguard, right, safeguard the respect of the constitution. And if we ourselves engage in the bad action, it will lead to the what? Disestablishment of the constitutional values like justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, and etc., which are embedded and enshrined in the preamble of the constitution, right? And if we engage in the good action in the public sphere, what it will lead to? It will basically lead to the strengthening of the constitutional values of justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, and etc., right? So what will be the next consequences? So very subtle consequences, like it will lead to the free and fair elections, right? Free and fair election. Just imagine that you are given a charge of election duty, right? And if you engage in good action, it will always lead to free and fair election, which will ultimately help to set a responsible government, which is one of the most important factor of any parliamentary democracy, where a responsible government is very important, right? And see, just through our right action, what are the important consequences? It will lead to the public sphere, and hence what will be the ultimate consequences? It will lead to the solidification of the consequences in private sphere, right? With the welfare of public sphere, it will also give the private or individual satisfaction that yes, we are doing justice to our post, right? So these are some of the important consequences that will be resulted in the public sphere. Now let's discuss some of the bad consequences of the bad or unethical actions in the society as well. So we have to be mindful of bad action more than the good action. Why? Because we have to be always careful about the bad action, because it takes only one bad action to kind of eliminate all the consequences of good action, right? हम हिंदी में एक चीज़ बहुत ही ऑफ्टन सुनते हैं कि आपकी ज़िंदगी भर की कमाई हुई इज्जत आपके एक खराब काम से बर्बाद हो जाती है, राइट? सो दिस इज हाउ इम्पॉर्टेंट इट बिकम्स फॉर अस टू नो द कॉन्सिक्वेंस ऑफ बैड एक्शन in order to be on the path of good action and the consequences of good actions, right? So now let's see some of the consequences of bad action. What are the consequences of bad action? It will basically promote evil practices in the society. Promotion of evil or ill practices in society, like corruption, right? It will lead to communalism, right? It can lead to idea of Naxalism, right? Why the issue of Naxalism is very much prevalent in the remotest part of our state, that is Chhattisgarh, like Bastar and etc., right? So there is several policy by the central government for the tribal people, but it is not being effectively implemented in the remotest part of our countries like Bastar, Dantewada, and etc. And because of that ineffective execution of policies, the tribal people who later on go and join the Naxalism group, they basically feel neglected and left out, they feel neglected and left out. So their main revenge, or their main antagonism is towards the government, right? That it is kind of non-inclusive in nature. That is why they revolt, or they resort to the armed rebellion. So here, if any district administrator being posted in those parts of the country, what if he or she just makes sure or ensures to implement the policy in very effective manner, right? So if you will see the Naxalites cohort, very young populace of the very youth and young populace of that particular region, they go and join the cohort or Naxalite group. Okay, so what if the administrators engages in promotion of good and inclusive education for them, in skill development? They focus to bring out those particular youth and young of that particular tribal or forest dwellers to outside places, and focus on giving them skills and training, right, employment and etc. What will nudge them to go and join this particular groups which are kind of evil in the society, right? So we have to think in certain manner. There is something which is lagging here, which is leading to certain kind of evil vices in the society, right? So we have to think in those manner, and this is how very subtle of our bad action is kind of manifesting in immense evil consequences like Naxalism, communalism, corruption and etc. in our country, right? So when we talk about in trade and commerce sphere, so what is the consequences like cartelization, right? What is cartelization? Cartelization is basically a kind of cartelization. Okay, so what is cartelization? Cartelization is basically what is we are discussing the consequence of bad action. Okay, we have discussed some evil practices in society. Now we are discussing what cartelization. What is cartelization? Cartelization is basically a group of servants or civil servants or public servants plus businessmen. It is a group or a kind of cooperation between servants and businessmen who are exploiting the resources of particular areas, right? So we often hear about the ill practices of mafias, sand mafias, coal mafias and etc. And when we scrutinize the mafia cases, we often come to realize that there is engagement of the local administration, there is engagement of local police and etc. in the scandal as well, right? So this is what a bad consequence of bad action can lead to. It can lead to the cartelization or exploitation of what local resources through mafia and scandals, right? So this is how a bad action can result into. So what are the other? It can lead to crony capitalism. Again, crony capitalism, where a cooperation or a kind of coordination between the public officers and the businessmen exploitation of the resources, right? Crony capitalism. The most important bad consequence is criminalization of politics. Criminalization of politics. There was 2004, it is a little bit old report by Harvard report. It is basically which says that there is 41% of politicians who are with certain sort of criminal backgrounds in Indian politics, right? And this is kind of brings bad image to one of the largest democracy of the world, right? And this is what the consequences of bad action will be in the public sphere. Again, you guys can come up with your own sort of consequences, right? And it is more about a experience, because we get to see the public life in our day-to-day lives, right? We are getting to see, we are getting to read in the newspapers. Recently there was a case where an IPS officer was ran over by a truck driver, right? Truck driver, a IPS officer was ran over. Why? Because he was just investigating a mafia scandal, right? Mafia scandal, and he was ran over by a truck driver. So these are some of the very saddening news that we often hear, and right, and these are what, these are some of the consequence of bad action, right? Though this IPS officer was very good, he was very ethical, he was very moral in his practice, this the bad action of certain people who were the part of public life and also the private life, like the predecessor administrators and police service people who were engaged in this mafia, because of their bad deeds, bad action, it led to the loss of life of this honest IPS officer, right? So these are some of the events that we often come to hear in the news in recent times, and this we can sincerely say that it is against our moral conscience, it is against our moral conscience, right? It offends our moral conscience. And if one is aspiring to be an civil servant, where we are aspiring to serve the people of our country, we have to be very much particular about the consequence of bad action in public sphere, because we are not representing our own personality, but the entire institution of bureaucracy is manifested through our personality, right? So one out always be engaged in more ethical act than in the unethical one, right? So that are some of the consequences of ethics in the public sphere. Now let's see some of the consequence of ethics in social sphere, right? The second is social sphere. Right, so second is social sphere. Okay, so all right, so now let's see some of the consequence of good action and consequence of bad action. All right, so what will be the consequence of good action in the social sphere? It will be basically peace, right? Peace, respect. These are basically the promotion of universal values like peace, respect, mutual cooperation, mutual coexistence, right? What it will lead to? It will lead to more civilized society, right? If everyone will resort to ethical action in society, what it will lead to? It will lead to basically civilized society. It will be lead to just society, right? It will promote the idea of what? Vasudeva Kutumbakam, right? Vasudeva Kutumbakam. Why? Because Kutumbakam, right? What does this particular doctrine of Vasudeva Kutumbakam mean? The entire world is one family. Entire world is one family, right? Why or how entire world will become one family, or how it will strengthen the idea of Vasudeva Kutumbakam? Because everyone will become ethical, everyone will act in certain ethical manner, and hence there will be very meager or almost no differences between the people, right? Not about the differences as in reasonable differences, because being a human being we are prone to reasonable differences, we are prone to some against ideas, but it is about the ethical differences which will get neglected, right? And hence world will become one family, which will lead to the mutual cooperation and coexistence and peaceful existence of a humanity at a large. There will be no warlike situation that we see in the world, like Russia, Ukraine, the Israel, Hamas, and etc. Israel, Palestine, and etc. Right? So this is what will the consequence of good action in the social sphere, right? Not only this idea, it will also lead to the promotion of just give me a second, guys. It will also lead to the promotion of some of the government schemes in very effective manner, like Swachh Bharat scheme, right? Swachh Bharat scheme. Why? Because now let's take an example of Bhutan. There the cleanliness is very important and significant part of their societal ethical practices, right? There everyone tend to get abided by the cleanliness or code of cleaning in the society, and hence the Bhutan is one of the very cleanest country in the entire world. It is first carbon free country of the world. Their people are very much strict and particular about what the hygiene and personal cleanliness, and hence if the ethical practices will prevail in the society, it will also lead to the execution of government plans like Swachh Bharat schemes. Why? Because everyone will tend to do or follow the code which is being formulated by the government, right? So this is what will lead to the open defecation free program, right? Though we are effectively on the way to achieve 100% open defecation program, it has not to be limited only to certain cities and places, but we have to make entire country open defecation free, and it will not be possible if each and everyone will be abiding themselves in the ethical code of conduct, right? Because if let's say person A thinks that ODF is right, but let's say there is a person B who thinks or have no opinion about ODF, right? And there is a person C who thinks or who do not consider open defecation free a serious issue, right? And hence he practices defecation in the open areas, right? So see, here we can see differences in their personal belief. But what if there is a ethical code of conduct by the government, and they regulate the idea that everyone have to be abide by this ethical code of conduct, right? Ethical code, and hence the differences between the belief between A, B, C will be eliminated, and everyone will be is striving to achieve open defecation free, and hence the entire country can be attained the open defecation free program, right? So this is how we can effectively implement the ethics in social sphere, right? It will also lead to the effective execution of schemes like Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, Beti Bachao. Right? So this is what will be the consequence, or these are some of the important consequences of the ethical actions in the social spheres, right? What if everyone will become ethics, right? There will be very successful implementation of programs like Swachh Bharat scheme, open defecation program, free open defecation program, Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, right? So these are some of the consequences of good or human or ethical human action in the social sphere. What are some of the bad or the ill, some of the consequence of bad human action? Some of the consequences of bad human actions are basically, again, social discrimination or social evils like discrimination, It will promote social evils like discrimination, casteism, right? Untouchability, class segregation, class segregation, etc. Right? What will bad action in social sphere will lead to? It will lead to communal disharmony. Communal disharmony. Why disharmony? Why? Because it will be the resultant of intolerance that will imbibed in the individual due to the bad action in the society, right? Because of intolerance, it will lead to the issues of communal disharmony, the issues like mob lynching, which will increase in the society, right? Why? Because these are some of the actions or the consequences of bad ethical action, right? Because of the unethical action of single individual, the very sinful events like mob lynching can result into in the society, right? There will be very, very heinous crimes like gender specific, gender targeting, right? Gender targeted violence, right? The recently we have seen one in the Manipur, right? Which was one of the most heinous crime in the history of our country, where the two women were paraded, right? I am not even feeling comfortable to speak such things from my mouth, but that is the reality of the world. And being an administrator or aspiring for such an covenanted post, we have to be aware about the consequence of bad or unethical action in the social sphere, right? How our bad or unethical virtues like greed, envy, and etc. can lead to, right? It can lead to such a heinous issues, right? Not only this, it can lead to issues like rape and all the crimes like murders, robbery, theft, etc. right? These are nothing but the consequences of unethical actions in the social sphere, right? So just take these things in very handy and ensure to quote very relevant ideas and news in the exam, which will give the idea that you guys are aware of the worldly happenings in the world, right? So always remember to quote certain pertinent and relevant examples. We are already done with the two spheres. The first was political, the second was social. Now let's see the third sphere, which is basically the religious sphere. The third one is religious sphere, right? What are the consequences of good action and bad action in the religious sphere, right? So what are some of the consequences of good action and bad action? The consequence of good action can be what? Religious tolerance, right? There will be mutual and harmonious existence. There will be the promotion of the values of sarva dharma sambhav. There will be promotion of ideas like peace, cooperation, right? Truth, non-violence of Gandhi G, right? And ultimately it will lead to the existence of what? Dharma in the society, right? So these all are the consequences of the good action in the religious sphere. It will enhance the religious tolerance. People will become more sensitive towards different religious sentiments, right? They will become respectful towards them. We will tend to accept the differences of opinions, and still we live in the particular society. And that is what India is known for, the unity in diversity. We are the nation of diversity, or diverse culture, religion, right? And hence in our country especially, it becomes very important for us to practice a good action in the society, because it will have a good consequence of religious tolerance, mutual and harmonious existence. The idea of sarva dharma sambhav will strengthen. The idea of peace, cooperation, truth, non-violence will be promoted, and hence ultimately it will lead to the establishment of dharma in the society. What is dharma? It is the ultimate state as per the Gandhi G, which will lead to the march of God in the earth if it is established, right? And hence it will become a Ram Rajya, right? That was the idea of Gandhi Ji. And what are some of the bad actions? Some of the bad consequences. Some of the bad consequences are basically, if one tend to act unethically in religious sphere, it will lead to the idea like fundamentalism, right? Fundamentalism. And how? Because of fundamentalism itself, it will lead to some of the most heinous crimes like terrorism, right? We know several terrorist organizations which basically operates on the idea of religious fundamentalism, right? That particular I will not name the religion and etc., because this is kind of not only pertinent or relevant to a particular religion. Nowadays the religious fundamentalism is being seen in many of the religions, right? And that was not the idea of religion. The idea of religion was always to promote unity with the individual themselves, unity of individual with the God or universe, right? But these days what we are seeing, the religions are resorting back to religious fundamentalism, where they are becoming very insecure about their religion ideas, and hence they are ensuring to promote their propaganda than the real teaching of their religion. That is, there is only one God and universe with which the individual should aspire to achieve the sense of unity, right? And hence the consequence will be the religion fundamentalism, which will lead into the heinous acts like terrorism, which will lead to the ideas like hatred. It will lead to the ideas like communal violence, etc., right? And what are some of the other consequences of bad action? It will lead to the practice, it will promote the ill practices of superstitions in the society, right? It will establish the idea of intolerance, religious intolerance, where a particular religion will become intolerant towards other religion or all the other religion, right? It will lead to the promotion of some of the very evil practices like mob lynching, where the minorities will either be executed or entirely terminated, right? So these are some of the ill or bad consequences of unethical or bad action in the religious sphere. And hence an administrator needs to be very mindful about the consequences of bad action, so as to ensure there is no religious fundamentalism happening in the particular district. There is no sense of hatred and communal violence which is being surfacing. There is no promotion of superstition by any particular religion or sect. There is no religious intolerance or practices like mob lynchings and the execution of minorities and etc., right? So these are some of the consequences of consequences of ethics in human action. We are already dealt with basically the consequence in private sphere and the public spheres as well. Now we will basically see this particular question. All right, the question is, what do you understand by ethics and what are its determinants? How is ethics different from values, right? So this is the questions, that is the practice question for today. You have to attempt this particular question in 250 words. I will just give you a basic structure for this particular question. You guys have to attempt the question and send me the answer in the telegram channel, that is UPSC Gig by NRG itself. I will evaluate your answer and come and respond you back with a positive feedback, right? So how can you attempt this particular answer? So there is 3 parts to this particular question. The first part is, what do you understand by ethics, right? You have to first explain what is ethics, right? You have to explain what is the determinants of ethics. Now how is ethics is different from values, right? So you can start with the simple definition of ethics, right? What do you understand by ethics, right? So at its simplest, ethics is kind of set of moral systems and standard which is regulated by the society, which affect the human action in the social or public and religious sphere. So this is the definition, or you can write the definition like, ethics is a system of moral principle. They affect how people make decisions and lead their lives, right? Ethics is basically concerned with what is good for individual and society, right? Ethics basically deals with good human action, or it is set of moral principles which influences the human actions in the society, right? In the society, you can write certain examples, and this is how you can define the ethics. You can write basically, ethics covers ethics basically deals with, okay, let me clear the board. So this was the first part of the questions, what do you understand by ethics? So you can give some broad idea about ethics, like ethics basically deals with the following dilemmas, like how to live a good life, our rights and responsibilities in society, moral decisions, that is what is good or bad, and according to which we act in the society, right? This is how you can write about the what do you understand by ethics, right? It will basically includes the definition plus scope of ethics. It will basically establish a holistic idea about ethics, right? So we have seen the definition, that is ethics is basically a set of moral principles which influences human action in the society, right? And scope, this basically gives the scope that ethics deals with the following dilemmas: how to live a good life, rights and responsibilities in the society, and moral decision, that is what is good and bad. Now you have to write the determinants, right? And we have already discussed the determinants of ethics, and there are basically 5 determinants to decide whether any actions are ethical or not. And the first determinant we have seen was the law, right? Was the law. The second determinant was basically the motive or intention, right? The third determinant was basically the circumstances in which the particular action was or has been committed. The fourth was basically the matter of an action or nature of the action, which will basically constitute of means and end. And the fifth is basically what? The fifth is basically the consequence or the result of an action. These fifth determinants of grounds will decide whether the action was ethical or not. And these are basically the determinants of what? Ethical action. So before attempting to answer this particular part, that is what are its determinants, just start with definition, that determinants are basically the grounds or the basis upon which ones decide the rightness or wrongness of an action. It is known as determinants, right? Then you can list down the 5 determinants or the 5 determinants of the ethics. The first is law, motive, intention, circumstances, matter of action, and consequences of result, right? Then you can come to the third part, then how is ethics different from values, right? So this part has been already discussed in greater depth, and I will not deal with this particular question. If you guys want to know this particular part, go and watch previous lecture. You will be able to make a holistic difference between ethics and values, right? With this, we almost come to an end, guys. Ensure to show your love by subscribing to the channel, that is UPSC Geek by NRG, and also keep learning. Remember the motto statement of UPSC Geek, that is as you strive, so you thrive, right? As you strive, so you thrive. अब जितनी मेहनत करेंगे उतनी फल मिलेगी. With this, let's end today's lecture and all the very best.